Hey, this is Dr. Priyanka Venugopal, and you're listening to the Unstoppable Mom Brain podcast. My conversation with Dr. Sunny Smith, talking all about science and coaching. I am so excited to bring you today's podcast guest. Dr. Sunny Smith is a physician turned coach. She is the founder and CEO of Empowering Women Physicians, and I wanted to bring her on to this podcast to talk about her experience, not just her personal experience and how she went from being a physician to a coach, but also to discuss the data and the science with the impact of coaching. I know for me, before I ever even discovered coaching, I had a lot of thoughts around what I thought coaching was. Today's conversation with Sunny is not just going to share a different perspective and a really interesting story, but also have you see the impact and the scientific data around how coaching can change your life. I'm not going to wait any further. Let's get into my conversation with Dr. Sunny Smith. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Unstoppable Mom Brain podcast. I am so excited to bring on my guest today. This is Dr. Sunny Smith. She is a physician turned coach who coaches brilliant physician women. She's going to introduce herself, tell you a little bit about her story and what brings her to this podcast. I literally have little chills because I have been trying to get Sunny to have this conversation with me for a while, just in brief, because we were talking about this for a moment before, but Sunny delivered an amazing talk and presentation at our mastermind event last year. And she broke down, and you all know I love a good, love to nerd out, the science and the data around how coaching can impact humans, specifically women. And I think especially high achieving women, which is who we talk to on this podcast. So as soon as she delivered this talk, I can't remember if I chased you down right after the talk or if I just started messaging you and we need to talk about this because I love bringing expert guests and coaches to share their perspective and their journey so that we can inspire more people to be impacted by coaching. So Sunny, introduce yourself, take it away, and then we will just get into the conversation.
Beautiful. So thank you for having me. First of all, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. My name is Dr. Sunny Smith. I trained as a family physician. I spent my academic career at UC San Diego School of Medicine. I left there as a clinical professor. I'd spent my career as a medical student advisor, physician wellness, running a free clinic, and fell into coaching because I found it incredibly useful myself after I had a bike accident and sort of had to, when I couldn't change my circumstances, I had to change how I thought and felt about my life and what was going on. And that's when another women physician recommended I listen to a coaching podcast. I did. I started seeing everything differently. I thought this was so amazingly helpful because, again, I was a formal advisor for medical students on their wellness. And I thought this is an incredibly effective tool that I had not been using. And as I applied it more and more to myself as a grown, professional woman and not just advising trainees, I was like, our wellness matters too. And we thought we would be happy when we arrived on this other side of all this training and got the titles and director roles and all of these things. And yet we continued to be quite distressed and burned out. And I started to see that we have options and we don't have to do all of these things. We can start changing the way we think about things, the way we feel about things, and what we choose to do and what we choose not to do. So then I found it again so incredibly effective myself that I trained to do this and started helping other people to do it, initially one-on-one and then group programs. And now, I lead a large company that helps support women physicians through any issues they have, personal or professional, to help themselves feel better.
I love that. And I know your story is actually a very beautiful story. So for anyone after this podcast, we're gonna put all of your information so people can really find you and hear your whole story. When you think about, I mean, I know your story because you've shared it, and it is truly a remarkable journey in your circumstances and the injury that you had, and just the power of a podcast that
Right,
changed your life.
right.
Can we just talk about, I just feel goosebumps even thinking about your specific story because you were truly in a circumstance. Maybe you can just share briefly, how you could literally not change your circumstances and how the power of a podcast and just the message around coaching literally changed the trajectory of your life. So can you just share a little bit about that? And then we're going to get into coaching.
Yeah, it's fascinating and particularly appropriate for this conversation in this audience because this is a podcast. And so,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
if you really believe that it's possible for the input in your brain via podcast to really change and shape and influence the way you see the world around you, then you can kind of take action from that place, even just from listening to this podcast,
That's
even
right.
just this one episode, right? Like I always
That's right.
invite people to believe that they're going to hear something that's going to change the way they look at things. And so this time it might be my story, it might be the data, it might be you, it might be something, even just one sentence that they can
Mhm.
hold on to and apply and go, oh, yeah, maybe that, right? And you just sort of like
Yeah.
wiggle things a little bit about how
Mhm.
you see things, and then sort of, the crack is where the
Mhm.
light comes in into the darkness. And so, yeah, my circumstances, I mean, I had an amazingly beautiful life, right? Again, full professor at one of the most beautiful universities, at one of the most beautiful cities, with an amazing marriage and a healthy child and a house that I loved. And, you know, you would think everything was perfect. And in a way, it really was, corner office, job that was so meaningful, right? Helping
Mm.
people who had nowhere to go, right? A free clinic for decades. And that's not a job that you come by easily, right? And there's not a lot of, because most physicians have to bill their patients, right?
Mm.
So that the clinic can continue to function. So I just carved out this like beautiful space for me in my life. Yet in hindsight, I can see like I had 7 director roles. I was working late at night every single Wednesday, for instance, for 20 years. And my
Right.
son would say things to me. He was in preschool and he would say every single day, 7 days a week, he would say, first thing when he woke up, is today the day you work late? Is today the day
Mm.
you work late? And it like
Mm.
started weighing on me.
Yeah.
And he thought only women could be doctors because all my friends were doctors.
Right.
He thought
Right.
it's kind of like how people think nurses are doctors, but for him,
Right.
that's what he
Right.
thought. And people would ask, "Do you want to be a doctor?" As
Mhm.
they would when you have kids and you're a doctor, and perhaps for your other professional audiences, like if they're a lawyer or whatever, they're like, "Do
Mhm.
you want to be a lawyer?" And he'd be
Mhm.
like, "No, because doctors work late." And I'd be
Mm.
like, "Ah."
Yeah.
So anyway, I went on a vacation after not having been on one for quite a while, of course, which I'm sure your people can identify with as
Mhm.
well, to French Polynesia. I came down a hill on a bicycle. It was an electric bike. I've been having trouble with the bike going up. And I went over the handlebars, landed on my face and my arms. And so I broke both of my arms and and my elbows, and was unable to feed myself, to brush my teeth, to go to the bathroom by myself, my face was all smashed in two, so I couldn't really eat normal food, couldn't dress myself. And I had a head injury, so I really and had sort of like a concussion. So I couldn't focus and even watch TV, anything like that. Had something called positional or static tachycardia. So I couldn't sit or stand. So I would only be able to lay there. So that might be a long introduction to, busy, wonderful life. And then suddenly, like,
Mhm.
and you just have to lay there and lay there and lay there and lay there. And there's nothing else you can do. And you can't help yourself,
Yeah.
nothing.
You
And
literally
so,
cannot change your circumstances. Literally
no,
cannot physically
for
move.
months.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
like the
it would
ultimate.
change eventually, and that is good
Right.
because some people, of course, I could have been completely permanently head injured or,
Right.
paralyzed, honestly, could have been paralyzed. And so I'm very fortunate that all of my injuries were relatively temporary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't do anything to change it. And so, all the things that I thought I had to do, and only, I'm sure your listeners can identify with this, like only I can do this, right? Only I can take my son to school. Only I can make his dinner. Only I can write these letters of rec. Only I can do the grades. Only, right? Only I can see the patients. Like I have to, I have to, I have to. If I don't, who will? I have to do these things. I have to wake up and keep going and going and going no matter what. And I learned that was not true because the world kept spinning and all of the things I
Mm.
needed to do got done, every single one of them. And if it didn't get done, it meant it didn't need to get done. And
Mm.
so I was a part of physician Facebook groups, as you are too.
Yeah.
And one was called PMG. A friend of mine,
Mhm.
Hala Sabri, founded that years
Yeah.
ago. And it's called Physician Moms Group. And various moms their physicians will like support each other, tell each other what to do. When my little boy was young, they sort of like, it was very comforting to have advice because most of my mentors, you know, were older or they were men. And I kind of felt like I was the only one having a baby and didn't know what to do. So in there, somebody had mentioned that I should listen to a coaching podcast because when you can't change your circumstances, you can change how you think and feel about it. And I'm like, whatever. I didn't even know.
I like the biggest eye roll. The biggest eye roll.
Right.
I felt the same way.
Suck it. My arms are broken.
Yeah. What are we even talking about? You want me to listen to a podcast or what are we talking about right now?
Yeah. And I have to say, this was 2017 and that doesn't sound that long ago, but it was 7 years ago. And I literally at that time did not know that there was a podcast app on my phone. The only thing I know, right? Crazy to think about. But everyone, all your listeners can think back, right? To when is the first time they discovered there was a podcast app on your phone? And before that, you're like, what is this? I have no idea. The only thing I had heard about it was that med students would podcast the lectures that we were trying to give. And so they would skip the lectures so they could listen on 2.0. And we were like mad at podcasts. I didn't know it was an app. And I didn't know it either
until someone mentioned a coach. I was like, wait, it's literally that. I was like, wait, I opened up the phone. Like, I typed in podcast into the search. I'm like, what is this? I don't know. Maybe
literally on the home screen. Yes, it's on the home screen and I never saw it. So anyway, it was there. And I had my husband search for me the name of this podcast because I couldn't use my hands. And so he pulled it up for me. I went to episode 1 and I pressed play and he had to put the AirPods in my ear because there was no chance I could bend my arms, right, when they were stuck out at 90 degrees to put these AirPods in my ears. And he would just press play and eventually he was able to leave to go to work. You know, at first I had like nurses and physical therapists and occupational therapists, etc. But after a while, it would just be like press play and I would just lay there and listen and listen and listen. I was like, wow, this is really powerful. Like I get to choose when I go back to work what I put myself back into, right? I don't have to re-choose everything about my life. And most people will not have this kind of situation where everything goes on pause, but still every single day we re-choose. Every day that we get up, we put the key in the ignition, we go to work, we are choosing that. We don't feel like we are because we, you know, people rely on us or we need the money or whatever, but we really do have self-efficacy, autonomy, agency that we sort of have been enculturated to forget about, that your life is just your life. It just is what it is. It's like rinse and repeat, like Groundhog Day, right? Right. So, and also before I'd had an awful lot of why'd I get on the bike? Why'd I get on the bike? Why'd I get on the bike? And I just wanted to undo the past and I was arguing with reality. And none of that mental energy was helping me at all because no matter how much energy I spent on it, I was never going to be able to not have gotten in the accident. So I started to perceive, you know, how did I want to feel about it? I was feeling resentful and I wanted to feel maybe more at peace and maybe eventually even fortunate, like fortunate I was alive, fortunate I didn't have permanent damage, fortunate that I had a forced experience in my life to reflect for the first time ever, like forced downtime. Again, if you have professional people who listen, they probably don't have downtime, or if they do, the only time they do is perhaps if they had a child, and that is not downtime. That is like the busiest time. So anyway.
Or if they do have downtime or vacation, their mind is not able to take downtime. Like they're always thinking about the next thing that they could be doing or how could we be more productive. And even the downtime is not really downtime.
A week does not count. 2 weeks does not count. And especially if you're like going that whole time, because then you're like, I got to get on the train. I got to get on the airplane. I got to get back. And there's laundry to do. And there's so much I'm falling behind. But when it's months, there is nothing. And especially if there was nothing I could do. Like on occasion, I'd be like, well, maybe I could do that one thing for that one grant, or maybe I could do, and I'd try eventually after some period of several weeks to be like, I could, and I'd try and type. And man, those tendons were like, and my hands were like, no, I don't think so. No, you will not do that. So I really, really like imagine everyone here not able to do laundry, not able to care for anyone else, like nothing. And your brain is all you have that's really working. I mean, your kidneys and your heart and your lungs and all those things are working, but your brain is also working for you all the time, producing all these thoughts. And are they helping you or not helping you? So you just become very aware of them and aware of all of us have been indoctrinated. All of us.
Yeah.
In a culture, in a society, like even Monday through Friday is completely artificial, right? Like, what is that about? It's from the Industrial Revolution. Like, so when you just have this awareness, you're like, what am I going to do with this newfound awareness? And so that's where this sort of, coaching concepts were applied to me. And then I would talk to my friends about them and I would talk to my family about them. They all thought I was crazy. And I was like, well, I'm going to go forward and learn more about this anyway. And the next step for me, there was the podcast, then there was like a membership program. And then there was, if you wanted to go deeper, you could train in this. I was like, that is so for me. I'm totally going to go deeper in this. I wanted to. So I had sort of like been getting coached, hearing coaching, like real listening in to others being coached in these group programs. And then I was like, yes, I definitely want to do this. So then started being coached more so, and then started coaching others. And then the data started coming out and I was like, yes, validation.
Which is like what we're going to get to. Oh, I cannot
exactly.
wait. So just, I want to, before we get to like the science and the data, which I mean, it's going to be just so exciting, I think, for everyone to hear. I just want to talk through for a second that journey, that moment where you were in a circumstance. And I think that all of us that are listening to this podcast, we are all in certain circumstances that maybe we love, maybe we chose, and sometimes maybe we don't. Maybe there's something about your work life, your mom life, the way that you're thinking about your time and your tasks. Like that's what your life is right now. Those are our circumstances. And what you're sharing is just discovering a podcast started to shift your perspective. And I remember, Sunny, even for me, I remember I was driving to work. This was me when I was probably a little over 200 pounds. And I just felt like nothing, I have this life on paper that feels like I have nothing to complain about. And yet clearly there's something that I am not able to pay attention to. And I remember it was Katrina Ubel, who we both know. She just said something on her podcast and it was such a, I'm laughing now, such a simple sentence. Your thoughts create your feelings. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you even talking about? Because for so long I used to say to myself, that's just how I am. That's just how I think. That's just how I feel. Like if me and my husband would get into a fight, I'm like, that's just how I feel. And it was very like not taking ownership over the thoughts and feelings I was having because I didn't know it was even a thing. I didn't even know it was possible. So I feel like discovering the podcast was that moment where I was like, wait a second, I do have agency over my thoughts and feelings. What is this about? It shifted my perspective enough. Now it took me down a totally different path. Tell me about that moment and why, really, what was the difference between experiencing a podcast, like listening to it and consuming it that way versus actually getting in with the messy implementation of being coached itself? And then we'll get into why it's so impactful.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the very beginning of these episodes of, a woman who at least I identified with in some way, telling me, because I've been a personal development person for decades. I'm sure many of us have. I'm sure many who are listening to this podcast have. So I just thought, it resonated with me. And when I looked around my house, I'd see all these books on this type of subject, but I hadn't really been able to fully live it. You have this awareness, it's out there, but are you really living it, on the day-to-day? And then I also was introduced, right, to Katrina Ubel. God love Katrina, because once for me, and I think for many of us, once there was someone who was like a little closer to, I could really identify with that person because there was some characteristic about her that I was like, I see myself in you. And that, for me, that was, she's a physician. I'm a physician. We're from the same culture. We get it. We understand each other. And if she thinks this stuff is real, then I'm not crazy, And so, because there was like, oh, this is the self-help personal development world. And then I was like, oh, wait, a physician is saying this works. I'm definitely not crazy, because everybody I knew, like, no one knew about coaching, and no one was applying this kind of work, and no one thought it was evidence-based. And so I was kind of on the down low. And then when I went to go train in person, I was so happy to see there were 5 physicians there. And I was like, what's your name? What's your number? What's your email? Does your work know you're doing this? Does everyone think you're crazy? All of us were hiding. All of us.
Right.
Nobody knew. And so there was like that normalization was starting for me. And so normalizing it made it easier to talk about. And then immediately at that same time, the American Academy of Family Physicians had their first physician wellness ever conference, national conference. I went, and there were 2 physician coaches speaking. I was like, what? They're on the main stage about tools as an intervention for very distressed physicians who are either starting to burn out, very burned out, depressed, or even they were talking about suicidal physicians, right? And clearly there's a range of interventions that are needed, but that was a place that people could at least start talking about their own thoughts and feelings in a professional context, and it wasn't like you were broken. And so then when I really dove into the sort of like deeper work of training and doing with my peers and doing it with professionals, and people who are very experienced in this, it was, I mean, you can do a lot, honestly, with the podcast. And then when you have a guide kind of holding your hand and having you see your blind spot. In medicine, we call it like a scotoma, that it's like physiologically you cannot see certain areas, like a tiny part of your visual field you cannot see. And so we just think things are a given. Like, for instance, in the medical system, we think it's just a given that people take call. We think it's just a given that you don't get a lunch break and you don't get to go pee. We're like, what do you mean? What do you mean I could take lunch? I know it sounds silly, but
what do you mean we're not working through this? What do you mean I'm not checking my inbox or checking my labs during my lunch hour? Absolutely, yeah.
So there's just a lot of cultural things. And again, depending on your culture or your background or your family, there's just a lot of things that you don't really see are completely optional. And again, it's not in a way that gaslights you, because that would be really rude and terrible, you know, but it's just awareness that maybe there's another way to look at things that might be a little more empowering than placing you in the victim role, and that your feelings always make sense, right? However you feel is real and it's valid. And then you label that. I learned to label that like, I'm feeling stress, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling whatever. And just that is evidence-based. If your listeners do one thing, like have them label their feelings and get in touch with their feelings. What are you feeling? That's you. That's not on someone else. That's you. And you get curious about, non-judgmental, right? Curious about, why am I feeling this way? And then I would start doing like, what am I thinking about this? Like, why am I so frustrated with this? And then I kind of understand, oh, I'm feeling so much rage because I'm thinking the system shouldn't be this way. And then I'm like, well, of course the system is this way. It's designed to benefit itself. It's not designed to benefit us, right? And whatever the things are, you can use all kinds of examples, but that alone, the affect labeling, if you put someone in an fMRI, you know, it decreases the distress signals in their amygdala. So just doing that is evidence-based. And then like, you know, when you have someone walk you through that and help you understand what we call an unintentional model, right? Which is like your unintentional thoughts that are just running. And 90% of your thoughts are the same as they were yesterday, right? And most of them are negative because of the negativity bias of the human brain that is designed to keep us alive. So knowing that, we're like, okay, well, let's look at some of these ones that are the most problematic and that are causing me a lot of emotions that are very distressing, right? There's like desirable emotions and undesirable emotions. It's not necessarily good or bad, but ones that we want to cultivate and ones that we want to turn down the volume on a little bit. And so having someone walk me through that and repeatedly like have me go out, because it's think, feel, act, right? Think, feel, act. Not just think, feel, ruminate, which is what we tend to do that keeps us helpless, but think, feel, act, go out there, take action and see what kind of result you get. And then come back again, better informed, and do an iterative process. And even if you fail, quote unquote, fail the first time or 10 times or 100 times, if you're really committed to the results, you're going to keep trying and experimenting. And all you have to do is think of something super high stakes, right? Like if your child was sick, or if you were trapped in a car or a burning building, or whatever that is. Like for me, one circumstance that I made right away was I decided I was going to do this retreat in Bora Bora, and the Four Seasons, because it was the most amazing, luxurious, like experience I'd had before I became a coach, where I was like, how was this available to me my whole life? And I never chose it because I didn't think I was like deserving enough. And I was from a background where we didn't have enough money to do stuff like that. And it was just not something I would do. So I thought if we could remove women physicians from their day-to-day life and bring them somewhere like that and have them really reflect on, the whole world is available to you. What are you choosing when you go back? It's sort of like the equivalent without breaking your arms. Like it was you had to like remove yourself from your children, remove yourself from your job, remove yourself from everything, because it's so far you can't go back home. Anyway, the point of that is that I signed a 6-figure contract to deliver this retreat there. And so I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to let my family have to bear this burden. I'm going to find people who want to change their lives and are going to sign up. So that was like one example of how I was like, I'm just massive action is what we call like when you're willing to do whatever it takes until you get the result. It doesn't matter if you do 5 things, 10 things, 100 things, right? You're just going to keep going because you're very committed to getting the result. You're willing to pause. You're willing to feel frustrated. You're willing to want to give up. You're willing to believe that you really should give up. And then you're willing to like take a break and come back to it and be like, okay, this is really important to me. I'm going to do whatever that thing is, right? For your people. So
I feel like
that's
there's like, this idea that you just talked about, this massive action, it kind of brought something up. I really think about the high achieving professional woman. This is like, and I mean, if you work with physicians, but truly any woman in any industry, she's probably thinking, Sunny, I'm taking massive action every day. I'm like, you should see me. If you were a fly on the wall watching me, I am taking all the action. However, I think what you're talking about, I think it's just so important to kind of discern this, like kind of separate this out, is that so many times women are taking massive action from a subconscious feeling. You don't even know what's driving you other than I'm supposed to do this. I have to do this. I should do this. There's a lot of these patriarchal rules and societal rules that we think we have to follow to be worthy, to be valuable, to be productive. And that's how we get to feel good about ourselves. And the shift and the difference between what you're talking about is to intentionally drop into what do we want our life's experience to be, and then take massive action to make that happen. I just kind of am curious what you think about the difference between massive action, because I think women are doing it, versus the kind of massive action you're referring to.
I think that's a very important point, because anyone who's high achieving is already doing a lot of action, right? We don't need to be told to be more ambitious or to take more action. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something or that we want to do something, right? And so I think part of it, like I used that as one example of where I was willing to keep trying at something. Yet concurrently, and probably even more importantly, preceding that, I intentionally stopped doing things. And so there's like this massive inaction or massive unsubscribing. Like I'm going to unsubscribe to these million news letters that I have, right? But I'm going to unsubscribe to the idea that I need to be a director of a zillion things. Like, so when I went back, it's like, which directorship am I going to give up first? Which one am I going to give up next? Which one? And it's not give up, it's step down from and transition to another woman leader, right? Like when I step down, someone else gets to lead. And may we all be mindful of these transitions in our life where we're just carrying these things. There's some kind of like Zen or Buddhist proverb where you're carrying a raft, and you need it to cross the river. But once you get to the other side of the river, like put down the raft it's just dragging you down. It's heavy. You
Hmm.
don't need all these things that you needed before. And so
Yeah.
the tools that got us to where we were, where we
Yeah.
are now, are not the ones that we need to keep utilizing forever. So it's like,
Right.
look at what got us to where we are.
Yeah.
Super overachieving,
Right.
probably staying up late, working harder than often the other people in our household, right? Carrying
Hmm.
burdens that our culture puts on us. And do we have to continue to choose that?
Right.
Really? No, we
Yes.
don't. And so
And that's
after that, like,
coaching. And it's like, I
yes,
think this is the analogy. And I actually feel like even Brooke Castillo, who's the founder of Life Coach School and who we've both worked with, she's the one that also, I think of this example where there's a tack in your ass. And she says, your coach is talking to you. There's a tack in your ass, and you're saying, I'm in so much pain, or I have this big struggle, like my ass is hurting. And the coach says, did you know, by the way, you have a tack in your ass? And as like the person that's like living with the pain, you're like, no. And you're trying to overwork yourself out of the pain in the ass. You're trying to overthink yourself out of the pain in the ass. It's just, if you just reached around and pulled the tack out of your ass, your pain will go away. And the example, I don't know why that story came to mind with your raft example. I think women, we use the raft, we cross the river, and then we forget we're holding the raft. And this
exactly.
reminds me of this blind spot when you're in the messy, and I call it messy implementation, which is what coaching is messy. If you're a high achiever, you might like right angles and perfect things and highlighters and all the spreadsheets. But coaching is messy. And I think it's because we're uncovering blind spots in a messy way that we didn't know existed. It's like, hey, did you know you're carrying this raft? You've crossed the river. Did you know that you're still
Put it
carrying the
down.
raft? And it sounds like such an obvious example. Like there's a tack in your ass, obviously, but we don't know. And we are not able to see our blind spots, which is why I think, being coached, actively getting coached is where there's so much room for transformation.
Yeah, there's an analogy that's like that I've heard where it's like a dog on the front porch where it has something that it's sitting on and
Mm,
it's uncomfortable. It'll just be like, "Hmm, hmm." And so that's kind of what we're all doing,
right.
right? And it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to get up off of it, right? And it might bleed a little when you get up off of it.
Mm,
But then eventually, once you do, you're like, wow, I can't believe I sat there on that sharp thing all this time.
right.
And I think, as you said, like it's the human condition, first of all, is messy. It
Yeah.
is like we're born in a mess,
Yes,
we
we are.
live in a mess,
Yeah.
right? Where it's continual evolution of various stages of messiness. Like you think about when you're learning to walk, that's very imperfect. You think about when you're learning to be a teenager, right? You're like trying
Mhm.
to get your independence, you don't know what to do. And then you become a grown up, you're like, I don't know exactly how to do this phase of life either. And then you get elderly,
Becoming a
right? It's,
mom, like we didn't come with,
yeah,
like you don't get a manual when you become a mom for the first time. It's
no,
so messy, right? You think you know how it
yes,
goes.
it
It's totally
is.
different.
And you think you know ahead of time, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be like this. And then you get there, you're like, whoa, okay, I had some big ideas, didn't I?
Yeah.
And so I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of life is just being willing to embrace that messy part because if you think you've got it all figured out, first of all, you're just wrong, right?
Mhm.
And you think it's going to be perfect if you stress enough, if you worry enough. In your mom example, it's like, I'm going to get the crib ready and the bassinet and the pictures on the wall and the pretty outfits and the, right? All of the perfect diapers. And I'm going to do this,
Mhm.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to breastfeed exclusively. And then life happens and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, so that's all out the window. And it's the willingness to move forward without being perfect
Right.
that it enables us to evolve. It's like many of us have the idea of child development, and the pediatricians of the group would know that
Mhm.
there's, you expect anticipatory guidance for, okay, when you're 6 months, chances are they're going to be smiling soon. When they're a year, they're going to be walking soon. And so you talk them through these things. And adults have adult development too, right? We're going to be scared of taking this next step. We're not
Yeah.
going to want to leave our job until we have another one secured. We're going to be nervous about a babysitter because they're not us. We're going
Right.
to, right? You can sort of anticipate a lot of
Yes.
these
Yeah.
things. And just to know, it doesn't ever get to a place where you're not a human being and you don't have thoughts and feelings and suffering.
Yeah.
There's going to be suffering at all times. And it's just a matter of
Yeah.
how much additional stuff we pile onto that. and how much additional blame and shame and imposter syndrome and making ourselves wrong, as opposed to being like, this is what it's like to be human. And
Mhm.
I have everything inside of me as a human that I'm ever going to need to heal myself. Yes, we can get help from the outside, and those helps are very effective. For instance, vaccinations,
Mhm.
antibiotics, right? But none of those things work unless we have the stuff inside of us that makes them work. And so, along
Right.
these lines, it's we are not broken, we are whole, and there are tools outside of us that can help us
Mhm.
get the results that we want faster. So I think it's
Yeah.
understanding ourselves as we
Mhm.
are and the ability to change, whether it's letting go, adding on, whatever those things are we're hoping to create differently in our life. But don't think you're going to
Right.
be any happier there per se, right?
Right.
Because you'll
Right.
get there and then it's a hedonic adaptation where we just get used to our circumstances no matter what they are. Like if some people want to be making 100,000 a year as an example, or want to be working half time, or want to be whatever your people
Mhm.
want, right? You think when you get there, it's like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow,
Mhm.
but the rainbow just continues to move the more you chase it. You
That's
never
right.
catch the
Yeah.
end of the rainbow.
Which is,
And
guys, this is like one of those things, like it's such a, it sometimes might feel like a bitter pill to swallow. Like, what do you, like, I
mm-hmm,
remember when I was 200 pounds, I thought when I lose all the weight, then I
mm-hmm,
will feel some flavor of happy, I think. And I
mm-hmm,
lost a little over 60 pounds, and it turns out I was still a human with a human brain. And here's the other thing I think, I love your rainbow example, because high achievers, when you hit a goal, your brain wants the next goal, because we are humans designed to grow and we want to keep pursuing the next thing. I just think it's so important, and I think it's so fascinating because, Sunny, coach empowering women physicians, and I think about, for me the word is unstoppable. While I didn't feel happier, maybe like subjectively or objectively happier when I hit my goal weight or after experiencing coaching, I did feel more unstoppable. So I think,
mm-hmm,
even for
mm-hmm,
you, I think, and maybe you can talk about this, but maybe people, the end goal, the end of the rainbow is not that you feel happier, it's that you feel more empowered in the life that you
mm-hmm.
have. And what if empowered, or that feeling of unstoppability, meant, oh, I actually have complete agency to navigate this messy life that I have. Turns out I don't have to feel certainty all the time. It turns out I don't have to feel confident all the time. I can actually experience flavors of doubt and nervous and frustration and anger and confusion and still take, in your words, massive action. How empowering or unstoppable do we get to feel then? And then think of the life we get to live when we're coming from that angle.
Yeah, I think the thing is when the goalpost keeps moving
Yeah.
and just keeps moving and just keeps moving, then you're always chasing, right? You're always chasing because happiness is over there. It's called the arrival fallacy. It's a
Yep.
fallacy. It's not real. And because you think when you arrive, you'll be happy. And so
Yep.
really it's learning to enjoy that journey of the analogy, right? Like looking up at the rainbow and being like, that is phenomenally
Mhm.
beautiful. And I'm planted and grounded right where I
Mhm.
am.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to go around the corner and see what else is around the corner. And for
Yeah.
instance, with your weight analogy, the thing is, once you arrive at that thing and you think that thing's going to make you happy, if it's a certain amount of dollars or money, or whether it's a certain weight or whatever that external validation thing is, you realize once you arrive at that place, that's where the real work stops or starts,
Mhm.
because you
That's
thought
right.
you were going to be happy when you got there and you're like,
Ah,
oh, I could be 140 pounds and I'm still not happy.
100%.
I guess so. That's the
I
external
100%.
validation, and it becomes the
100%. Yeah.
internal work. The
Yeah.
internal work, really, like what's the real
Yeah.
work? What's the
Yeah.
psychological work? What's the
Mm.
learning to enjoy this life you've been given? And
Yeah.
I always have like random examples from my current life, but I now live in a tropical Caribbean, like warm area where the weather's always perfect, except for some rain sometimes, of course, hence the rainbow analogy, because we get a lot of those. But I last week went to Anchorage, Alaska, and I was outside and it was -5, which for me was like 90 degrees different than I'm used to.
Mhm.
And I just had the thought, it was such a contrast to me to what I'm used to, that I was outside. There's a spa, like a Nordic spa, where you go in hot water and you come out and it's freezing. And then you go in hot water, you come out, it's freezing. And I just got this very hyper awareness of, thank God I am alive and that there is like a warm building for me to go into, because if I was left out here for just a handful of minutes or hours, I would be dead. And so I got this brand new, fresh, interesting perspective when I went into the little steam room and was laying there. I was like, I am so grateful for this body. I am so grateful my heart is still beating. I am so grateful that I am breathing and I don't have to see all that cold air, right? And I just had gratitude for life, because it's just, I mean, it's way less extreme, but if you have a cancer scare or if you lose someone you love or whatever that is, and for me, it was just being extremely cold. I was like, I'm so grateful I'm alive. And if we can somehow cultivate that more often, like I'm grateful that I am here on this planet. I am grateful I still get choices. I am grateful that I can see I can start and stop doing anything I want at any time, whether you're in a terrible relationship, a terrible job. I can walk away. I don't have to keep choosing these things, because I have life and I have breath and I still have a chance. So let's not waste it, because soon that's going to be gone, and living as if this life is short, because it is.
And I think even speaking to gratitude, I think especially young girls and women especially, we learn, you should be grateful, right? Look at the world around you, look at what compared to what you have. And so sometimes I think gratitude can get attached to shame at a really young age. And so I think that it's really important to feel the difference between shame, which you might be calling gratitude. It's not really gratitude. Gratitude feels different in your body. It's like such a different visceral experience to experience true gratitude than like what you're told you're supposed to be grateful for. And I just think that that's kind of an interesting practice to kind of think about. But so, the whole thing, I really want to get to this because, we're going on and on about the coaching, but tell us, kind of, it can't be in a nutshell because I think this is such a comprehensive topic, but tell us a little bit about the data and the scientific background around why coaching is so not just amazing, but essential to high achieving professional women and the impact you have seen in your own work with it.
Yeah, so this may seem to people up to this point like an evangelistic podcast, right? Because we're just telling our anecdotes. And first of all, the human brain is designed to hear and create story, and it sticks. Stories stick. Like we remember our own stories, we remember other people's stories. Lessons are passed down throughout cultures in stories, like the story about the raft and the river, right? And what we're still carrying. So stories matter. They really do matter. However, in this day and age, we also really like data to prove something. We like randomized controlled trials, which are the gold standard for evidence for something, which means that one group of people get something, another very similar randomized group does not get that thing. And then you look at the two groups and see if they were the same on average at the beginning, how different are they, or are they different? The assumption, the null hypothesis, is that they'll be the same, right? And so you have to prove with at least 95% confidence that this difference that you're seeing is due to the one intervention that you gave. And so there are now 4 randomized controlled trials in physicians alone about how coaching impacts our mental health, well-being, quality of life, et cetera. The first one came out in 2019, and it was authored by the nation's leading physicians wellness experts, so Lottie Derby and Tate Shanafelt, and there really are no higher respected people in this field. And it was published in a journal, and that was et al, so there's other people too, published in a journal that there really aren't significantly higher respected journals, because it was published in JAMA, and I became a coach in 2018. So when it came out in 2019, I was like, this is phenomenal. I have been validated. What I believed all along is real and true. And I immediately went on my own podcast that I had started right after I became a coach, because I knew how much podcasts affected me. So I talked about, this is real, there's data. And they talked about how in the paper, for anyone who wants to go read these papers, of course, I'll give you all the references, you'll put them in the show notes, but it talks very specifically about the methodology and why it works. It talks about it's a strengths-based sort of empowerment where, because all of us have different strengths, right? Like I'm doing an Enneagram assessment for my people in my coaching program this weekend because like I'm a 7, I'm an enthusiastic visionary. So I do a lot of crazy things, right? And because that's what a visionary does. And my blind spots or weaknesses include organization, being timely, for staying focused. And so I don't focus what we tend to do, all of us, is focus on those weaknesses where we're not measuring up. But in their trial, they talked about how this is it's not what's wrong with you. It's not a diagnosis. It's not pathologizing. It's not trying to prescribe anything. It's saying we all have strengths. What are yours? Let's work on implementing those, leaning into those, and helping you if you're in burnout or having a low quality of life or whatever those things are about your job that are bothering you. Let's look to realign with how the things that are good about you, you can utilize those more to impact your life. And even believing that you're going to make changes decreases the distress in your brain. It really does. Like there's studies on empathy and compassion. And so if you look at somebody else and you're seeing them bleeding, as an example, you get distress in your brain as if you're bleeding, and it can be measured. And if you even imagine that you're pressing on them to help stop the bleeding, the distress in your brain goes down. So you can use these tools to imagine that you're helping yourself, imagine that you're helping your loved ones, right? And there's a helper's high that we really enjoy. That's why I think people like physicians get joy and coaches get joy out of their life, is because it's neurobiologically, we're designed to help others and obviously to help ourselves, to keep ourselves alive. So it shows that first trial showed outcomes that have decreased burnout, decreased emotional exhaustion, and improved overall quality of life. So if there is an intervention that would improve your overall quality of your whole life, why would you not take it? Why would you not participate in it, right? What are the side effects? It's not like a pill where you're going to get dry mouth and many of the other side effects that people can get from the most common, say, antidepressants or things to modify our mental health, weight gain, etc. So that was the first one. And then the next year in 2020, another randomized control randomized controlled trial came out, which showed, again, equivalent findings. And then they actually did a longitudinal study to find if the lasted after the intervention, and they did. So even after you leave the intervention, these are things you can't unsee, unknow, unlearn. And so once you see them, you may or may not continue to act on them as intensely all the time, but they're tools that are available. And so that was a powerful study. And then in 2021, some of our colleagues, Tyra Fainstead and Adrienne Mann, did this work, who trained where we did and had the similar types of interventions that we offer. And anyway, just to say it, most of us, all coaching, I would say, have a lot of similarities, and it's not brand new, right? You can look back at ancient religions and you can look back at Buddhism and all of these things where there's things that talk about what you think matters, what you believe matters. And so, but there's been recent ways that people can systematize and walk people through this and implement it. And so the next intervention that had been documented was on female residents. And you can talk about like people who have no control over their lives. Think about a resident, because they have to work 80 hours a week. They really don't get to say what rotation they're on, what schedule they're on, who they see, anything. They have to go through the whole program. I mean, first of all, they could choose not to be in the program, but we don't usually choose that because we are so invested. We are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and kind of need to get out the other side. And so that's 2022 actually. And they showed decreased emotional exhaustion, increased self-compassion, decreased imposter syndrome. And then what they did, and this next study came out in 2023, is only like probably 4 months ago, because it was October. And this was a large multi-site. So these things just kept expanding, getting bigger and bigger. And so it was 26 sites in all kinds of states with people from all kinds of training backgrounds. Over 1,000 people were entered in this trial, women physician residents, again, with very little control over what they do. And they found that every assessment that they measured improved. Every assessment, every outcome that they measured, similar to those ones that were done before, improved. And then in my own program, because you don't necessarily have to do a randomized controlled trial, right? We do pre-post data. So people who come in and people who come out. And our data, we measured the effect size of, because there's things can be statistically significant, but it's like, is it really clinically different, or will you actually feel different?
Does it actually
right?
impact anything? Right.
Yes,
right.
exactly. Yeah. And so our data shows from hundreds of women physicians, and this was particularly during the pandemic years, which were very, very distressing years for people who are practicing in medicine. And so our burnout decreased from 77%, which is horrific, right, at the baseline. 77% of people's physicians are burned out. In our population, it's 60%. In the main physician population, in the general US physician population, of course, people who would opt into a coaching program probably have higher levels of distress, which we saw. And it went down to 33% in 8 weeks. So it's not only incredibly effective, it's incredibly fast, the change that you can make. And even if you talk about the first one in 2019 from Lottie Gervais and Tate Shanafeld, published in JAMA, they only had 6 calls. 6 calls. And like my program is way more than that, right? And I'm sure that your program is way more than that too, right? So our effect sizes are larger. And so like people who had very little professional fulfillment, our numbers are like 28%, it goes up to 68%. And then we have self-compassion, which is super important for everything that we have talked about, because there's the hoping that you'll be better when, but self-compassion is meeting yourself right where you are, no matter what. No matter how much you weigh, no matter what your kid is doing, no matter what your spouse is doing, no matter what your boss says, just understanding, just like you would for a best friend. You'd be like, girl, it's going to be okay. And girl, that person crazy is not your fault. And right. But when it's us, we turn it on ourselves and we're like, I'm so broken. This sucks. Why can't I ever do this right? How am I ever going to get out of here? When again, if it's your friend, you'd be like, you're going to be okay. And so our data on that goes from only 18% of women physicians had that, and it goes up to 64%. So, and again, that's just in 8 weeks. So our effect sizes, many effect sizes, so like antidepressants, about half of people, I believe very, very much in therapy and psychiatry. Absolutely. I think coaching, therapy, and psychiatry are all very useful tools. I think they're a spectrum, and you might need to utilize any or all of them at any given time or different phases of your life. And I think we're very, very fortunate in the 70s and 80s, right? That's when really the effective treatments for clinical depression became available and kept being improved, and they absolutely save lives. However, around half of people will not really get significant effect from them, and the effect size sometimes is not very big. So the randomized controlled trials in that might see like a small or medium. And of course, coaching isn't intentionally dealing with people who are incredibly suicidal or having as terrible, objective assessments on a PHQ-9, which is a depression screening test, right? However, our effect sizes that are documented from multiple studies, right, and including our studies, coaching has medium, large, and very large. And again, ours has large and very large effect sizes. So it is, or can be, and there is evidence that it is equal or more effective than the pills that we can take for our mental health and that we are prescribing for mental health. And so at the talk that I was giving that you're referring to, I said if coaching was a pill, we would all be prescribing it because the data is so good. Yet there isn't like a pharmaceutical company behind it. There isn't one, singular organization that uniquely stands to profit from it. And there just isn't sort of that machine behind it, putting it on Super Bowl commercials, et cetera. So it takes people in the business world have known about this for a long time and have been offering executives coaches for a long time, because again, the
Yeah.
business ROI on it is even proven in physician literature as well as other
Mhm.
literature. So there's a journal or an article in JAMA called The Business Case for Investing in Physician Wellness. And you could translate that to any other industry as well. There is a business case. Retaining any of us in any form of our profession is better for the world, right? If we want that,
Yeah.
than making it such that we have to quit, right? Because the
Mhm.
attrition rate for people who are burned out is very high.
Right.
So it just makes sense to an organization even to invest in this. Yet most organizations don't currently.
Mhm.
And so it takes people, individuals right now and small
Mhm.
organizations to scream it from the rooftops and say, you don't have to suffer so much.
Yeah.
You deserve someone to hold space. And even I believe, because I obviously spend a significant amount of my time looking at other women physicians, either in person or on Zoom, and we don't have our phones, right?
Mhm.
And there's someone looking right at you,
Mhm.
interested in only what you have to say and how you think and feel. And even if you're talking with your spouse, for instance, or your best friend, half the time they're talking about how they think and feel, or maybe 90% of the time.
Mhm.
And so to have a human being making space for you, uniquely for you, and say, how are you feeling? What's
Mhm.
going on? Help me to understand you. And then is your life what you want it to be, or would you like to see things a little bit differently? Okay, let's help you get there. Let's make like one or two actionable goals that you can accomplish, and I'll see you next week and see how it goes. Right? That's just incredibly meaningful and
And
safe.
help you to see the blind spots that you didn't know have been weighing you down. And
Hmm.
I think even like just what you were talking about with the data and the science of the impact that it has for women, I always feel like it's important because so many women that I've talked to, they feel almost like, how can I get coached for me? Like there's so many people in my life that I need to take care of. The house I have to take care
Mm.
of. My kids I have to take, and we are so used to, again, being in that giving role. And I always want to come back to the belief that I hold, and I've seen the personal impact of it in my life, and I see it with my clients. When you feel better in your life, when you experience like doubly more self-compassion, when you experience just a feeling of betterness, everyone in your orbit, it's like a ripple effect, benefits from you
Yeah.
feeling and being better and you're like the way that you actually want to show up. And that does happen, not with books on a shelf. I know we all love like the good books on a shelf, but it happens with putting yourself in coaching spaces where someone can show you your blind spots and really help you see what you're not seeing.
Yeah, and bring a friend with you if at all possible, because it helps to have
Mhm.
some other friends, even if they don't come on right away. But anyway, talking
Yeah.
about these concepts
Yeah.
in real life, right? Talking about these things and
Yeah.
finding some other shared like-minded people, right? Like I do
Mhm.
group coaching because
Yep.
it's very powerful to see
Yeah.
someone else struggle with the exact same thing or something very similar to what you struggle with. And in her, you can see it. You're like,
That's the best
ah,
part about
yes,
group coaching. Like,
yes.
it's amazing getting personally coached, of course, but when you're watching someone else get coached and you're not in
Mhm,
their like pile of poop,
mhm,
you can see it
mhm.
so clearly. And there's so,
Yeah.
it's just like it's a coaching from a totally different angle, which I think is so
Mhm.
impactful.
And your defenses are down because when someone's talking to you, when someone pushes, you push back. That's just normal human nature. You
That's
get
right. Yeah.
defensive. And so you have no reason to be defensive. So you just have this awareness and see it. And I think for many women, people socialize as women, right, in our culture, where we have historically been the property of men, not
Mhm.
been able to own our own real estate, have our own credit cards. Even until about the year I was born, we couldn't even have economic independence. And so it's no wonder we were taught to serve. It's no wonder that they're having a hard time with the types of things you were just describing, which is like, I'm worth it, I'll invest in myself, and certainly not mental health and well-being, right?
Mhm.
And so I think a starting place for some women can be, if they can't see that when they do better, everyone around them does better. Although, of course, I hear that all the time. I hear from spouses, like I meet spouses, and I ran into one the other day when I was at the market, and he's like, my wife loves you. I'm so grateful for you. She's doing so much better. Right. So people will say she's a better mom, she's a better wife, she's a better spouse, she's a better doctor, she's a better daughter, she's whatever. They get along so much better with these people, but we can't really see that. We're willing to invest in the soccer club for our kids and a vacation for our family. But again, these are things that you learn and never unlearn. So it's really something that compounds over your lifetime. However, what we can often see if we are not open to seeing that yet is when we suffer, we can sometimes see that people around us are suffering because we care so much about our impact on others. We see ourselves yell at our kids. We really do. And we're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Right. And we see ourselves like tell off a coworker, and we see ourselves being quote unquote bitchy to our spouse and wishing we hadn't kind of gone off like that. Right. And so I've been doing some coaching recently where my person said to me, it was actually last week in Alaska, but she said, if you don't do this to take care of yourself, you will undermine your marriage. You will make people around you suffer. Like you get the choice if you want to get better or not. And if you don't, the people around you will continue to suffer, and you will undermine the very thing that you are trying to protect. Right. And so it's just fascinating because we have this, like, we want to avoid pain more than we want to seek pleasure. And so if we can think about the pain that we have and the pain that others around us have because we're not in a better place, because when you're in a pretty good, like if you're tired, all you can think is you want to go to sleep. If you're hungry, you think about nothing but food, right? And if you're suffering, all you can think is, I'm suffering so much. Don't you get how much I'm suffering? Right? I have no capacity for you. And if you're like, I'm so happy, right? You think when we come back to work sometimes from vacation, we're like, I'm good. I don't care, whatever. You just don't let it get to you. And again, you can help other people around you see, like, it doesn't have to be so bad. It doesn't have to be so painful. So I think the gap and the difference between those two things is huge. And so it's like, what would it be like to not be so unhappy?
And
what
to
would it be
not
like to
wait.
not suffer?
To not wait. I think that was the other mistake, or I don't even want to call it a mistake, but like something that I held for so long was like, when I'm done with medical school, then I will focus on myself, vague terms. So when I'm done with residency, then I will take care of myself. When I'm done with, my first kid who is a little bit older, it's like we keep waiting for our life, our circumstances to create something that will somehow make things easier for us to spend time or money or some effort on ourselves. And I think that that's the part that is also, it's like the other side of arrival fallacy. It's like we think when things are different, then somehow I'll have time for me. And it's just not the case, especially for the high achieving professional mom. We're going to be in some season or phase of our life always. And what would it be like to not keep waiting on yourself to really do this work?
Yeah, it's kicking the can down the road, and we are completely expert in that. We are expert in self-sacrifice. We'll just sacrifice ourselves for a little bit longer and things will get better. And the thing is, we all think next week is going to be easier. Like you've been trying to get me on this podcast. I'm like, next week.
I know.
Next week, because we all think next week is going to be easier. And then the next week comes and it's not easier.
It's not.
Right?
But we got
here.
Like,
last week, I'm going to be traveling. This week, I'm going to be traveling. The next week is my kid's birthday. The next week is Valentine's Day. But it's never going to get easier, really, per se, right? Next month, it's like, I'll start the diet on Monday. Like, what's the difference? And so then the question becomes, you can sort of extrapolate, okay, if I never do this, 5, 10, 15 years, what's that going to look like? And then there's right after that question is, well, why now? Like, what are the reasons? Your brain is like Google in some ways. It's a search engine. And so you can hijack your own brain or utilize what we know about human psychology, before you can call it hijack, but it's just utilizing wisely what we know about human psychology and neurobiology and use it to your advantage and say, I'm going to start asking useful questions. Right?
Like, instead of thinking like, now? Why should I not do this now? And now your Google search
is the default
of all the reasons for why you should be waiting on yourself, as opposed to flipping the question that you put into the Google search engine, which is like, why might I want to do this now? Why might
Yeah.
now be the best time for me? Now, all of a sudden, you're going to get a totally different Google
And
search
it
engine
could,
answer. Yeah.
yeah, you totally different answers. And
Hmm.
you can ask that question about coaching, of course, because that's what we're talking about, but you can ask it about anything in your life,
Hmm.
something that you've been wanting to do, right? Anyone who's listening, if you've listened this far, there's
Hmm.
something that you want to do differently.
Hmm.
Why now? And
Yeah.
give yourself the reasons. And you could also be like, why not now? But there's
Yeah.
usually a bunch of BS, right?
Yeah.
And or it brings you up with a blank slate, like, why not
Mm.
now? Okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, so why now then? Why
Well,
now?
I often say like the reason that we often will find ourselves keeping the status quo is just because our
Mm,
brilliant if you find yourself keeping the status quo, it's just because you have a very brilliant primitive brain who wants to conveniently keep a story that doesn't require any effort and change. And so
mhm.
we will keep our suffering just because it's what we're familiar with. And what we're talking about is asking a question that changes your status quo. What is that question? Start putting that into the Google search engine.
Yeah, and there's a question, are you okay with the status quo?
That's right.
And if you are not, for any
Right.
reason, then it's you and only you that can change the status quo for your own life. And so that is a skill that you can continue to build and build and build like a muscle. It's like, am
Mm.
I okay with the status quo? Do I want to change the status quo? If so, why? Find your
Mm.
whys. And if your whys are strong enough, then you're going to actually go and take some action. As you said, your brain just wants to stay with what's familiar. We stay with the status
Yeah.
quo because it's familiar. There's discomfort of the known and the discomfort of the unknown, and the unknown always seems scarier. And it's just like if you speak English or you need to speak Spanish, even if we say it's our second language, it's more effortful for
Yeah.
our brain in calories,
Yeah.
etc., and
Yeah.
attention. And it's like when you're driving to somewhere you don't know, you turn down the radio. Like that
Right.
makes absolutely no sense, except that you need all your mental capacity to work on that new thing. And so our
Mm.
old life is like driving to the store, right? And
Yeah.
the new way of thinking is just, it really is neurobiologically more costly to us. So we kind of have to turn down some other things and choose. We're going to learn a new path. We're going to learn a new way. And then that
Mm.
becomes the new language that becomes the default, because that old default story, not necessarily serving you if you're not getting the results you want.
And proving to yourself that you're able to do that and operate in the second language, like to me, that's where unstoppability, that feeling of empowerment comes from. It's like, wow, I was capable. I did that. Like, I wonder what else I could do, right? Like just proving to yourself again and again and again how capable we really are, which I think is amazing. Sunny, this has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like we could have kept talking about the beauty and amazement of coaching and its impact on women. But for now, this is going to be our conversation today. Share with us, how can people learn more about you, find you, be influenced by anything that you have to say over on the beautiful world of the internet?
I am at empoweringwomenphysicians.com. We have like a guide there that people can walk through the kinds of things that we do and that you
Hmm.
do, right? To actually walk people step by step through how to apply this process. Um, if they're a woman physician, they can come in my Facebook group, but that's only for women physicians. And then I have a podcast that's called Empowering Women Physicians.
We're going to put all the information in the show notes. And of course, the data and the articles that you shared, we're going to drop that in the show notes as well. Sunny, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This has been so amazing. I'm glad we finally got you here and we made it happen. I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you all enjoyed this conversation as much as me. As you can tell, me and Sunny could have probably talked about how much we not just love and adore coaching, but seriously, the impact that we have both personally experienced and what we see with our clients. One of my favorite examples that Sunny shared on the podcast was this idea of how, especially high achieving professional moms might have a bookshelf of books that you know you want to read someday, or maybe you are reading and bringing into your life. Or maybe you're listening to a podcast like this and you feel the possibility for how your life could be experienced differently. But what we also talked about was the difference between learning and active implementation. Truly, to me, that is why putting yourself in coaching experiences is invaluable, because the return on your investment with your time, your money, and your effort pays back for a lifetime. That's been my personal experience with coaching. And if you love this podcast and you love the topics that we talked about and want to make sure that you know about my free 5-day mini course, you can grab it over at theunstoppablemombrain.com/email. In this 5-day mini course, I'll meet you in your email inbox every day over 5 days, where I will teach you a small, tiny but mighty concept that will truly shift the way that you lose weight and keep the weight off for good. I hope you guys all have an amazing week, and I will see you at the next one. Bye.